Hello, I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to interview the most fascinating people. And this being our start of our 11th year, I've invited back a guest from history. You're not only history in town, but local history. And your family, well, you've brought relics from before we were born, right? Gary Fixen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bernie. Glad to be back.
What a collection. What's the story?
Well, my family's been here since 1920, and nobody moved around very much. As a result, things didn't get thrown out, and we simply have things that have accumulated over the years. These are some old light fixtures.
Oh.
The switch is from my uncle's 1920 wireless radio station that he broadcast from South 6th Street. And
in Grants Pass.
In Grants Pass.
And he broadcast code?
In the beginning, they broadcast code, that's right. And they had their own batteries. I still have some of the glass. I should have brought one of the tubes. Big glass cylinders that they put sulfuric acid in. They made their own batteries. And they smelled terrible. And my grandmother threw him out of the house, and so he had to go out and rework a woodshed. And that's why they used to call them radio shacks, because the batteries smelled so bad that the radio operators would have to put up their equipment in a separate building. And my uncle did that when he went off to college in 1924. He just left his equipment. And around 1950, early 50s, why, I stumbled into this little building, and here were all these wires and pieces of equipment and whatnot. I had no idea what they were. And when he came down, my uncle lived in Portland at that time. When he came back, I asked him about it, and he explained what they were, and I started restoring them.
Oh, my. Now, what's it called?
Well, these are the old Edison-style lights. Now, when Grants Pass first got electricity in 1889, when they first put in a power station, this was the type Edison bulb that was used. Now this one happens to be a Hollywood reproduction.
Oh, so I don't have to worry about the filament burning out on the show.
I didn't bring any of the originals. I bought these from a company because I can replace them. The originals cannot be replaced. They're just not available.
I like the bulb because it was hand blown.
They were
wasn't
hand blown. They were hand blown.
And so it has to have that little dimple on the.
It uses twice as much electricity and puts out half as much light as today's light bulb does. In fact, actually, it's worse than that nowadays. But this was the 1890 bulb, and then about the turn of the century, they went to a bulb like this that has more coils,
and
so the element
more light.
The element didn't shake as bad. That's what wore out the early bulbs. We have AC electricity, alternating current, and the long filament would get to start to vibrate. These don't vibrate as much, plus you have more filament, so you get more light. And this one is about a 1900, 1905 type bulb. And then the one that everyone remembers are what they called the hairpin bulbs.
Huh. And you did say these are reproductions, so
yeah, these are reproductions, right. The originals you have to burn on DC electricity. Now, if our room lights were dimmer, why, that would be a beautiful little light because it has all these elements that go around.
And it's shaped kind of drapey.
This is when they first started designing bulbs so that they were fairly durable. These were not durable. These were a little more durable, and these were used during the 20s, up until about the 20s.
This is gorgeous. I mean, I can see this at a dinner table or something with a few flowers around the base. It looks like a work of art.
Used to hang them from chandeliers and so forth,
and
too.
replace the old kerosene or lamp.
One like the 1890, like this one, put out about as much light as a good living room kerosene lamp would put out. And so they were about equivalent in their light output.
Without the smell or the mess or the smoke, soot.
Right. Now in Grants Pass, when the power company first started in 1889, excuse me, the power was only on in the evening from dusk till about 10 or 11 o'clock. And then they shut down the dynamo and the lights went out. And then the flood of 1890, why it wiped out the power plant. This was the original power plant here.
Oh my goodness.
And this is the inside of it. Notice the old switches, whatnot. But the interesting thing about the first power in Grants Pass was that it was only available to a few elite homeowners that lived up in the north section. Most of Grants and the downtown businesses had electric lights, briefly, because when the 1890 flood hit, it destroyed a lot of the equipment, and even after they tried to repair it, it didn't work right until about 1895. But what the average citizen in Grants Pass was more enthused about was what they called the Weir or Crib Dam that was right below where Caveman Bridge is now. And that dam is visible here in the back. It shows up the best.
Oh, I just love the way the lady's dressed for this photo.
Yes, she's standing up there, and here's the Weir Dam goes down the river and then across the river.
This is a little rowboat?
Mm-hmm. And in this picture, there's a sailboat, because what happened was when they put in the dam, it backed up the river, and instead of just a river channel running through Grants Pass, we suddenly had a lake. And if you look at that picture, see how wide the river is? That's a 500-foot bridge span there. It widened the river way out, and here's a sailboat sailing across it.
And ladies in the parasols out enjoying, is that a boat, child?
And they could sail from the dam below 5th Street up to about where the 3rd bridge is now, about where Potts Memorial Bridge is at. And in the afternoon when we had our westerly breeze, why that would blow the sailboats could go right back upstream with it.
And then just float back down.
Float back down.
Ah, with the current.
There's another picture here of a fellow with his fishing pole and a sailboat. So he's apparently drifted down, now he's sailing back up with his fishing pole. In this picture, you can see how large the lake was at the foot of 6th Street. This would be the 3rd bridge, just one of the bridge just before Caveman Bridge. But see how large the lake is in here? And that lake is really, was the center of Grants Pass recreation until 1927 when the flood took out the dam. And then the river receded back to its original channel.
This is, do you have any idea what this is along here?
That's the red arrow Otto Camp.
And over here?
And that is the Riverside Otto Camp. That picture was taken just before the 27 flood. And at this point, they were switching from auto camps to motels, motor hotels. They still did some camping, but they were starting to put up cabins. And the cabins had started with the Grants Pass Auto Park. Then it became the Riverside Auto Park. And then private enterprise moved in and started offering better services, and Grants Pass got out of the business. Reportedly, Grants Pass was the first city in the nation that offered free auto park for tourists, just because it brought in business.
Of course. Let's thank Chamber of Commerce here.
Yes.
And Oregon Caves, this kind of goes along with the same promotion time for the caves and the...
Right about 1920, well, actually it started in 1923, the Redwood Empire Association started promoting Northern California tourism because cars were becoming popular. And then in 1926, when they paved the roads through Grants Pass and along the Redwood Highway to the coast, when that road was paved, Then Josephine County joined the Redwood Empire Association, and the Empire Association then started advertising Josephine County with the Oregon Caves and Crater Lake.
And one of those promotions was to run from the Golden Gate Bridge, no, from downtown San Francisco
There was
to Grants Pass.
Yeah, they had several promotions. The Golden Gate Bridge was the south end of the Redwood Empire, quote unquote. And little old Grants Pass, Oregon, Caveman Bridge was the north end. And one of the reasons Grants Pass got the Caveman Bridge was that the Oregon Highway Commission was under pressure to put up a suitable bridge. The third bridge was a very mechanical looking bridge. And so they came up with the Caveman Bridge, which was a much more beautiful bridge, which happens to have been designed by Condi McConnell, who was also the designer of the big bridge at Gold Beach, that huge one.
Oh.
Now these were done before the Depression, and so it was with pre-Depression money. When the Depression hit, the Caveman Bridge and the one in Gold Beach are actually sister bridges. They're built at the same time, designed by the same man. When the Depression hit, everything stopped, but then Roosevelt came along with the Public Works Administration. And then they told McConnell, go ahead and design bridges. They used ferries along the coast for a long time. Design bridges along the Oregon coast, and he said he would design memorable bridges that would complement the Oregon scenic landscape, something like that. And so he designed these huge, beautiful, there's 5 of them, there's huge, beautiful bridges, and they all started, that are still there, you know, like up at Coos Bay and Quina Bay and Depot Bay. Those are all his creations. Those big Gothic arch bridges were his design.
Beautiful.
And
bridges.
exactly, and they started the early ones, Grants Pass and
Gold Beach.
Gold Beach were the first ones.
Well,
Of course, Grants Pass is pretty small by comparison to the ones on the coast.
right, and Grants Pass Bridge has lots and lots of history. I mean, kids used to love to run over the top of it.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Take their bicycles up over the top. You didn't ever do those sort of things.
Oh
did
no,
you?
I wouldn't do that. No, definitely not. I was a coward. I wouldn't do that. But I've seen people do that.
And fly underneath Caveman Bridge. I hear Bob Crispy was one of those wild and crazy
I've
guys.
heard that. I've never seen it documented. Maybe he did. You know.
I
could
think
be.
he
Could
and
be.
Benny Spaulding used to have some wagers about who could do what. And I can do something you can't do. And
Well, that could be. That could be.
we'll have to ask Bob.
Yes.
Now, you've brought more light bulbs. Do they fit in here too? I mean,
What this one is the equivalent of today's 100-watt light bulb. That's how big they were at the turn of the century to put out 100 watts. And it is a hairpin type bulb too. I don't light it because it's very fragile. But that shows the difference between light bulbs at the turn of the century, that being just 100 watt, and today's bulbs, which are 100 watts, that are half that size. The switches, the old knife type switches, this is one here. Today, the house switch was usually a rotary switch for the ceiling light, or a pull chain like that one there. But for like circuit breakers and whatnot.
I won't hurt this if I put it.
No.
This is our genuine imitation ceiling. And remember those little cords? And then they'd have fancy pull chains on them, like this one. Oh, boy.
Now that one, that's a unique one because you notice it has 2 pull chains.
Yes.
That is an early dimmer. That one would dim down. It had a circuitry in there that would go from, it would just use half the alternating.
Full on to half speed?
Yeah, it would just use half the alternating current. It would dim down.
I don't
The
suppose.
bulb is different. That's called a quack bulb. During the 20s, early 20s, electricity was new and anything to sell products, you know. People came out with the idea, started promoting the idea that there were healing powers to electricity. And so they came out with this bulb. And I'm debating whether I have enough nerve to turn it on here today or not, because it puts out a brilliant light. In fact, see how black the bulb is? It's burning itself out. And it just heats up immediately.
Well, let me just describe. It comes up filament, and then it makes 4 turns, 4 coils, about, what, half an inch? 3/4 of an inch. And that would give the best light, but of course...
It was as bright as a projection bulb, you know, in the old movie projectors. It just puts, and the heat it puts out is just tremendous.
So more light, more heat, more...
They called them quack bulbs because they were sold as a healing remedy that if you'd set next to one of these, they didn't last very long, but if you sat next to one of them, it had healing powers.
Okay, you just, Okie charmer kind of thing. A guy going around saying, you got to have one of these. Oh, my.
So that's how they were called quack bulbs. But the old knife switches were the predecessor to today's toggle switches. Now this one, if anyone's familiar with it, they'll realize it's made of wood, which means it's low voltage instead of being made of bakelite or some other dielectric material. But this one's wood, and it closes in either position. It can do it. This is for radio use here. But notice here, there is a wolf head.
Okay, why the wolf head?
In the beginning, electricity was considered to be pressure. And if you were shocked, they didn't call it being shocked, you were bitten by electricity.
Oh, I've heard that phrase.
And yeah, I got bit. Well, before the skull and crossbones that was originally used, why, they used a wolf head with his fangs bared. And
saying this is danger, beware.
Yeah, and they referred to it as electrical pressure. If an electrician was, well, they weren't electricians. In those days, they were electric mechanics.
Okay.
They were just called an electric mechanic. But if he was killed, he wasn't killed by electrocution, he was killed by electrical pressure. And that was the way it was.
A different language.
It was a different language.
Early language.
The term electrocution didn't come on until about the late 20s, I think it was.
And the reason this is wood, of course, is that the electricity will, the least amount of contact with the human being.
Don't
Don't want any electric what?
For electric pressure?
Electric pressure or electric shock.
For low voltage, wood worked okay as an insulator. If they were doing high voltage wiring, well, then they used bakelite or any number of other materials.
Even in early days.
Yeah, this is like this one probably dates from 1905, up to 1915.
And your dad or grandpa?
This one came from my uncle's wireless radio shack down in south end of town in 1920 1920. Why, wireless radio is a big hobby with kids.
Yeah, you didn't need a license or anything.
No, and so they made their own batteries.
How'd they make the battery?
Well, I didn't bring one along, but they had glass vials that, like a drum, about so tall, so big around, with a real heavy neck. And they had zinc strips that went into them, and they mixed sulfuric acid. And that would create the electricity. And as they used the electricity, it would give off gas that just smelled terrible. And that's where the term Radio Shack came from, because the smell was so bad that radio operators had to operate in a separate little building.
Can't you just hear a woman say, "You take that stinky stuff out to the shack"?
And that's exactly what happened to my uncle. He got thrown out of the house, and so he converted the woodshed into his radio shack. And when he went off to college, why, it was abandoned. And I found it when I was a boy in the 1950s, early 50s. I stumbled onto it, and here's this old building full of cobwebs and whatnot, with wires and switches and lights and equipment all over the place. And when my uncle returned from Portland for holidays, well, I'd ask him about it. And gradually I restored it. I have a bunch of the restored radio equipment at home. It's not operational anymore because the materials it was made out of deteriorated, but it looks good.
Oh, I interviewed a man from over at Sam's Valley who has, I just want him to see your collection here on the, take him a video and let him see you. He has restored in the old Sam's Valley School a wonderful collection of early, some of the tubes are, like you said, just huge.
Mm-hmm. The spark gap generator, which is just a big coil, like a big capacitor, has two little brass rods that go up like this, and you adjust the frequency with that. And when you get too high, why this arc jumps across the bridges across the tips. It's pretty impressive. And I used it once, and actually everything kind of glowed, so I thought, well, maybe I won't do that anymore because I didn't know enough about it to use it properly. But that's the way they used to do it. They called them spark gap generators, and they would use them for Morse code, and then later they converted the equipment over to voice. My uncles would reach to Rogue River, and the farthest he ever got was Gasky. And that was kind of a surprise because normally you couldn't go to Gasky.
Now, what vintage would this have been? When?
That was 1923. It was 1923 because he was very proud of that. He always talked about that.
Oh, that's called DX in the ham radio crowd. That's the distance that you ever, if you talk to my husband, he'll tell you he talked to the moon and back down.
Yeah.
And that's was the record of the time.
My uncle always said it was a freak thing that he was able to reach Gasky with the equipment he had in those days, because it was very low range, very low frequency, low power.
Oh.
And then when radio, when KYN came in 1939, we got our first radio station in Grants Pass. Why they had to quit using a lot of this because it created so much static that people got pretty upset that we're trying to listen to the radios.
And you'd hear beep 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 come through your radio.
It would just be a lot of noise. Yeah, it could be any number of sounds. And I never had any experience with it, of course, because I wasn't old enough. But
we did. We'd have neighbors call up, "Is Doug on the radio? We're having some..."
The ham radio, that went to higher power equipment, and that would create havoc with over a
but
great
then
distance.
you could go and kindly give your neighbor a little filter that then they would be okay and you could enjoy your hobby.
Mm-hmm.
You've done so many things. Your history, I love the history about your grandma and your mother but you've put together an awesome piece. This is back about the river, isn't it? Some of the very stuff that you brought pictures.
The Riverside Park, I knew really nothing about it. You know, I lived here all my life. I used to walk across Caveman Bridge. I'd look over the downstream side, and I'd see all this debris and concrete scraps down there, and I never knew what it was. And that kind of spurred, and that was when I was a boy. And so I thought, well, where'd all this concrete come from? And that's what led to doing this article, of the articles on the park, because you can't separate the park from the bridges. They're just intertwined, and it's kind of hard to handle them both at the same time. But they're one unit.
Riverside Park and its bridges, and this is the second in the series.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trusting that these will all be made into some book form, so we can.
I do it for fun. If somebody else wants to do something with it, they can. But for me, it's just fun to figure it out. You know.
So you've done how many in this series?
Well, I figure I'm working on the third one. I figure there'll be 4, maybe 5, because I keep finding more information.
Well, now, does it bring you into any interesting stories when you're talking bridges? I mean, all kinds of things have crossed there, like the military. We know that the soldiers camped at Riverside Park.
The Riverside Park started out as a place where the miners watered their teams. Well, it started out as an Indian camp. It was first a place where miners watered their teams and camped overnight to not have to pay hotel costs downtown Grants Pass.
And from there, it became
and then it has graduated to where it became a city attraction.
an auto camp where people could, for 50
The auto
cents.
camp came about by accident. The auto cars had come in and they had to have a place to stay and water, and so they camped by the river right at the foot of the bridge. And it turned out to be good business, so everything went from there. In fact, that's kind of the start of our tourism.
Well, and there was a racetrack there, and
The fairgrounds was located in Riverside Park until 1927.
I love all the stories, but in the minute or two we have left, just tell me about Grandma. A fine, refined lady from North Dakota.
She came to Grants Pass in 1920. She was deaf. She loved the Opera House. She spent all her time there, drugged my mother to the Opera House, who hated it. And my grandmother was a very good lip reader, and she had her place right down in front. Everybody knew that was Mrs. Ringette's seat. And so she always got to sit right in front. And until the Opera House closed, she could read lips. And she always wondered why all the actors quit talking at times. And it was because the trains going by, the noise was so loud, they'd quit talking. My grandmother would be very impatient, saying, "What'd they stop for?"
I just love that story, because here's a woman who cannot hear, but lived a relatively full life, abundant life. And your mom was a little bit uncomfortable being her gopher, or obeying this fine woman.
We don't have time for it now, but there were a lot of things that happened that left my mother wishing that she didn't have to do those things, such as being a chauffeur.
I understand that. Thank you, Gary, for coming back to the show and
pleasure.
for bringing modern electricity to Better Life Television. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I thank you so much for being my guest. You're welcome back anytime, and this is our 10th anniversary. Thanks for coming back again.
My pleasure.